because I did that. Because that seemed to be helpful for some folks who are able to watch the discussion from class, and I'll go ahead and upload it uh, later today. So for those that are new, welcome. The way that this has been happening or progressing is we just kind of have a topic and discuss it. And the topic seems to kind of develop at the end of our meeting. So we have a conversation and then somebody will ask a question kind of towards the end, and a lot of times that becomes our conversation for the next month. And one of the things that we wanted to just talk about today, and I actually had some people contact me, share ideas that I'll probably do later in the meeting, was thinking about the future of ministry, not just today, but even thinking forward into the next 5 years. And so this is not supposed to be a conversation of, I wish I had this training in CRECP training. I wish I had this class in seminary. This is more of a forward thinking. I've been serving as a pastor. I'm a commissioned pastor. I'm working on it. And I'm anticipating things that would be really great to learn more about or to have training. And the only agenda here is just to kind of think through together of those areas that we as commissioned pastors feel like this would be really great to have training as I think about anticipate the years to come, serving in ministry, changes of demographics, whatever that might be. And so, we're pretty excited about that. And just to give you a heads up, sort of the real world application from this discussion, and I've shared this before, I like these discussions to not have an additional agenda per se, but this is a way for us to essentially maybe come up with some ideas of some workshops that we can share in the future. So Synod does have a budget set aside for my area, and we'd love to be able to offer trainings and that sort of thing in 2025, 2026. And some of the ideas that we have today might actually, help us figure out those kinds of things. Because I don't want to waste anyone's time. I don't want to just put out trainings out there that people are like, And I suspect that there's trainings that we don't even know exist that are unique to what we see the future of ministry looking like. My focus is on CRECPs, but my feeling is we're all serving in ministry, whether a teaching elder, commission pastor. There's probably trends that we see as like, it'd be really great if we had additional training in that, as I'm seeing the future of ministry and that sort of thing. And just to share a side one of the people I'm meeting with is somebody who's really good at doing training on emotional intelligence and conflict management. And so that could be something I personally think could be kind of a cool thing, but that's just a side thing. I just thought I'd share that's one workshop that I'm looking into of offering into the future. With that said, I'll just open up the floor and just get a feel for what are those areas of ministry that you think, it'd be great if we had training here, or things that you're noticing in your community that you'd like to know more about, or things that you just think would be important moving forward, and those kind of pieces. And I'm a big fan of thinking outside of the box. So please don't think of it just a seminary kind of class. It might be just a class off the wall that you're just like, it'd be great if we knew how to do this as a leader in the community, as a person of faith. Anyway, so who would like to take a stab at it first, or just kind of share some ideas that they might have? Yeah, Lynn.
So I'll jump on here because I have another meeting that I'll have to log off a little bit sooner on. But I was listening to a really interesting segment on NPR yesterday about how many Americans are suffering from loneliness. And they talked about it's like 30 to 40% of Americans report feeling lonely. And they talked about how, for generations in the past, those needs got met at your church or temple, or but that's not going to work anymore. And they never answered sufficiently, to my mind, why not? So I think we're poised at this really interesting time in history that the church continues to have a place for people to find meaning and connection and belonging and purpose and all those good things to combat loneliness, but we're not seen as relevant. So I'm just kind of wondering, how do we bridge those perceptions? Because I think that the church is needed now more than ever, but how do we communicate that and connect with people that really may not have ever grown up in the church, may not know anything about the church? So I don't know if that's interesting to anybody else, but it was just kind of something I've been chewing on and thinking, wow, there's a real opportunity here to engage, but how do we do it?
Yeah, and I'm hearing two things, Lynn, if you don't mind. I always like try to summarize and make sure I'm understanding, you know.
Sure.
So in terms of loneliness, what I'm hearing is that you're like, okay, here's a problem in society that society is recognizing. We're part of an organization that could be a part of solving that or being a part of one of the solutions for that, but there's a disconnect of people not seeing the church as relevant, connected to this. Even though we see it, the world might not see it. And there might be some preconceptions of the church. And so you're asking, like, how do we make church relevant and connected to what the society is seeing instead of as something as separate? Is that?
Yeah, how do
Yeah.
we share God's love and invitation in a way that can be heard in these new times, both by a new
Okay.
generation and post-pandemic, where
Okay.
people don't want to join things.
Yeah. That's the other piece, right? Isn't that the second piece? It's loneliness, but also just joining this. Is that what we call it? Um, there's a famous book by a sociologist. It's probably 20 years old now, called Bowling Alone. And they looked at bowling leagues and the drop of participation and how there's a drop in membership across the board, not just churches, but joining and being a part of things and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah, how do we share God's love? How do we invite in a way that's relevant and kind of speak to where things are now? Awesome.
That's funny. I had typed that in the chat while she was talking about it and put a link to the book because that's what came to mind right away was that book, and the revised version is what between the old one written a long time ago and then the recent one. Interesting. But yeah, Putnam really does a great job addressing that, and obviously he lacks the church's insight into how we can reach out to people and be a support for them. Very interesting book.
Well, we kind of have a dual issue with that too, because we have the people who didn't grow up in the church, but we also have the ones who have gotten a bad taste of the church. And how do you get them into a place, and whether that's your outreach programs, making sure you develop outreach programs that come to where they are. It's, I don't know, it almost feels like that's probably what we're going to have to do, because boy, the other stuff we're doing isn't working. I mean, it's really sad.
The lectionary really brings this out for our Sunday today. And what weighed heavy on me in looking at my congregation is, talking about, being successful, where, we're called not to be successful, but to be faithful. And what I'm looking at in the church, looking at the age of the people in the church, they are at the point of having serving fatigue. And where our younger group has serving apathy, where they just don't seem to care. And so I think the Mark, I think, is an opportunity, and even James, an opportunity to talk about that. And what does it mean to be worthful in society, and that we receive our value from God, not from society. And I think that's why suicide rates are so high, all those kinds of things, because people are trying to get their value from what popular media tells us is to be valued, but our value comes from God. And so that's kind of what resonated with me as I'm working on the sermon for Sunday and looking at the lectionary.
There's a phrase that you said that was Keith, right? Up in Mackinac. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
I've got a story about crossing that bridge in the middle of the night in a snowstorm. But I'll share that another time. That's the scariest time I've ever spent in Michigan.
We got stranded on it for 3 hours when I was coming home from Christmas vacation from a church that I was serving in the lower Michigan, and we were stuck on it 3 hours. Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
It was a
But
little scary.
if you guys don't know, crossing into the UP, that is a big bridge, and the gusts of wind are pretty. They hit you pretty hard. I love, Keith. Well, there's a phrase that you said that. Well, there's a couple. I like how you said worthful in society, but I like this idea of looking at serving fatigue and serving apathy. I think that's a really interesting phrase. I don't know what to do with it other than just to highlight it. And I think that could be an interesting.
I didn't know how else to put
go
it
ahead.
into words. That was what
Mhm.
kind of came to my brain was the older people. Well, I did all that stuff when I was younger, but now I'm older, but then
Right.
you deal with the apathy, and that's a hard bridge there.
I would imagine this is something that nonprofits that require a lot of volunteers suffer as well, serving fatigue and serving apathy. And it might be interesting to hear from non-church groups.
I've been a scoutmaster
How,
for 30, I don't know, over 30 years, and very, very similar.
yeah,
Nobody wants to, that's why I'm still doing it after 30 years, because I don't want to drop it because of the kids. But
yeah.
there just is not that level of volunteerism that something like that takes, and very similar. That's why I thought that book, the bowling book, really helped to put words to some of that.
See, yeah, Debbie, thanks for putting post-COVID apathy. Yeah, I think our church and our members and our community members did a lot of reevaluations for COVID. And some of them are like, yeah, I don't really want to get back into that. And realigned priorities in a different way. I think that's but yeah, volunteer burnout. Because like, yeah, if we're honest, in a lot of ways, we are a volunteer organization. That's not only what we do, but we rely so heavily on volunteerism that it might be interesting to hear. Maybe there's some research on it. Maybe there's other nonprofits or other groups that use volunteers, how that works. Are there seasons of volunteering and that sort of thing? I don't know what marching band's going to do when Tara leaves, for example. Tara and I are both band parent. Well, Tara's definitely a band parent. I could be a better band parent. But right, it's the same struggle. I mean, it takes a lot to do that.
I think it's from my experience with volunteering. When I was little, I was a stay-home. My mother was a stay-home mom, so she volunteered as a 4-H leader. She was a Girl Scout mom. She was a kitchen mom at the church, diaconate at the, like all of these little things. And I, being the youngest, I just got toted around everywhere she went. I went, and when I was growing up, like in Girl Scouts and 4-H and whatever clubs or whatever, it was always the stay-home moms that were the ones who were doing all the volunteering. And at this point, when my girls have been growing up, they're now 23, 20, and almost 17, there's not a lot of stay-home parents. And if they're home, especially in the last few years, they've been working from home. So burnout is real. And I'm talking not just the older congregation members that we have who are saying, I've been there, done that. I've done my time. My kids are grown. They're gone. It's the younger generation turn. Well, even my generation and the 40s and the 30s, those parents are working full time in a lot of cases. So they're not able to put in those extra. They don't see the value in putting in those extra hours in volunteer time. So I think the biggest thing is to help them figure out why it's valuable and why it's important. Like they know, oh, that needs to be done, but oh, can somebody else please do it? But it's important to help people understand the connection and what they will gain by participating as a volunteer. And I've also learned over the years that you have to specifically ask people for a specific task. Putting out a blanket, hey, I need help XYZ on whatever date, that doesn't work. Especially if they've never been a part of that, of your team or your church or your organization before, because they don't know what they don't know. Nobody volunteers anymore just because it's the right thing to do. They want to know what they're getting into, what the time commitment is going to be, and how will they seek help.
Which requires those of us who are organized volunteers to be more organized, I guess. Right. Do you mind if I pivot on something, Tara, that you said that connects with this?
Sure, go ahead.
Because I think it could be a tangent as well, as that, because you were talking about this demographic of stay-at-home parents, right? And that was sort of like the cultural norm, for better or worse. Like that was sort of this is what you do.
Right.
And now we're in a situation where we don't have a lot of stay-at-home parents, or if we do, they're working as well. I don't know how to phrase this as a training or something, but I think I'm willing to bet that a lot of our congregations are still built around a schedule that's convenient and that has the built-in assumption that they're stay-at-home parents. I say parents, but I think the assumption is still stay-at-home moms. For example, we have a women's circle here, and they're like, we want to do Tuesdays at 10. I'm like, okay, but you're not going to get young moms. You're not. But if you're okay with that, and you think of it that, and they really understand it, it's sort of like a retired senior citizen gathering. That's fine. But I didn't want them, which used to happen, complain, where are all the young people? Well, they're not going to be here on a Tuesday at 10. It's not, it's just not going to happen. So, so part of the conversation, so I think there's a lot of stuff that we could build around volunteering and understanding that dynamic. And I bet you there's people out here that have done a lot of thinking on it, and that could be really valuable. But is there a kind of training of just understanding not what we think the demographics are or what they actually are, right? Because I think we have a lot of built-in assumptions about our communities, whereas we might be surprised what we find or affirm what we know. I don't know what that looks like, but I think that's interesting. What do families look like on the ground? What does our community look like on the ground as opposed to what we think that they should be, and adjusting to that? Anyone have any thoughts about that? It was just something that popped in my mind when you brought it up, Tara.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Wayne, go ahead.
One of the things I've been suggesting for a long time is we need an expert somewhere, and we've just skirted around it. That how do churches today reach 25 to 40-year-olds? The congregations I serve don't have the foggiest idea how to do that. A lot of our presbyteries don't have any resources to tell us how to do that. And we just take the attitude, well, if they want to come, they'll come. But the fact of the matter is, for example, here's the best example I can come up with. The churches I serve are still into offering envelopes? Ever been through this where you got to have the date on it and everybody's got to have a number and the whole thing? 25 to 40-year-olds don't know what the heck to put in an envelope. They don't know how. To them, it's not important. And there are a lot of things that, the older generation, my generation, thinks are very important that they could care less about.
Mhm.
The other thing that Gil Rendell said it best. He said what a lot of churches tried to do is put a bunch of instruments in the front, advertise it saying, guess what, we're going to have a contemporary service. Didn't have the foggiest idea how to do it. And then they complain, how come it didn't work?
Yeah.
That's where, if there's training out there for this is what we need to find out. How do we use social media to reach these people? How do you deal with the fact that these people don't talk to each other? They text each other. Everybody says, well, they're lonely. Well, they choose to be. So how do you deal with this? There has to be a way, because other non-denominational churches are doing it. Okay. I don't know how, but I'm going to find out. But, they're doing it. They're getting young people over there. So somehow or other, they're doing something different than we are. We need an expert.
Yeah, well, I just want to go ahead, Tara. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, Wayne, it's interesting that you say non-denominational churches are doing it, because our oldest daughter, Natalie, grew up in the Presbyterian church, went to UCC church camp forever, then went to, I'll loosely call it a Presbyterian church camp. That's a whole different story. But anyway, then she goes away to college and she goes to a church on campus, and she said, I love it. It's like church camp. I said, okay. So I went to visit her one weekend, and she was right. It was praise music. It was that music that just puts you into what I call a feeding frenzy, because they repeat over and over the chorus, which is fine and lovely if that's your thing. But it's a prayer, a scripture, a sermon. The church didn't get caught up in that, the liturgical stuff, the call to worship, the confession, all of those things that mean nothing to that generation. And fast forward, she's living at home right now while she's job searching. And she said, Mom, I love you, but I don't want to look at you as my pastor, so I'm not going to Central. So that's fine. I have no bones about where you go to church as long as you're going to church. And she's like, I don't want to go to Dad's church because it's the same kind of style. What do you suggest? And so she's going to a non-denominational church over here in Zanesville. I like the pastor a lot. He's a great guy, but it's the church camp feel worship without the heavy stuff of the liturgy. And she grew up understanding what the liturgy was and all of that kind of stuff, but it's stiff and stodgy to her generation.
This is Mary Ann over in Eastminster. This is the first I've been able to join you for these, but I have two. One's an observance, and the other is something that might help those of you who are trying to understand that generation that we're not pulling into our pews. It is a book, and it's a book called Preaching to Those Walking Away by N. Graham Standish. He writes in there that exactly what you've been saying, Tara. Yes, there it is. Bonnie has it. I found it to be very eye-opening. At the time I was reading it, there's a portion in there. It says that the people who have not ever been into a church are still seeking a higher power. They're still seeking to know who Jesus is. But if they walk into our traditional services, the Gloria Patri is foreign words to them. The doxology is foreign. There's a whole lot of what we do that turns them off. They want to know about a relationship. And so to prove it to myself, I just happened to have a gentleman painting at my house. And I found out from our chat that he went to a non-denominational church. And I said, can I ask you why? And he said back to me almost exactly what Graham Standish says in his book. And those churches are growing because they throw out the formalities. Praise and worship can be anything, anytime, anywhere. And in order for those ages of people to want to come back, we need to be able to greet them on their own level and meet them where they are. And I've even thought about my own family. I have a daughter grew up in the church. I have twin granddaughters that are 11. They grew up in the church until their sports activities all happened on Sunday.
Yeah.
And they all want to come back to church, but they're both exceedingly good in their particular sports. So it's really a tough line to hoe. So I even thought about, okay, let's have a group prayer before the game, meeting people where they are. But that's my one thought on this generation that we're wanting to have come in our doors. Read the book. A lot has been done in the church. It's Presbyterian, just across the border from here in Pennsylvania. The other is an observation that I wanted to share. I serve in a senior housing community where a lot of people are, as you have been saying, lonely for one reason or another. I see people who are wanting and willing to engage in activities, and I see others who are not. And throughout this last 4 or 5 years of pandemic, post-pandemic, we were all shut down during the pandemic. There's an independent apartment just across the hall from my office, and I could not go in and see that person. We were not permitted. They didn't come out. All their meals were taken to them for how many months? How long? One woman said, this is worse than World War II. So what I saw happen then, doors are open, pandemics, closed down or done. People began to do everything. And it's like a pendulum. Now they've come back to choosing, learning, they could do what they knew they could do without that because they did without it for months and months and months. And they're choosing to do or not to do. It's hard to compel someone to come to a Bible study. That's where I've seen a huge drop here. So I'm taking a different route with what I offer, but that's an observance, and I hope a help for you all with the book.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I smirked because Graham Standish used to be a major part of Muskingum Valley Presbytery's commission pastor training. In fact, when I went through, we did a long weekend at Graham's church.
Nice.
And Tara was a part of that too. And he's the kind of guy that I think I could see us reaching out to him and even just discussing his book and other things that he's done. There's a lot, because Blessed Church, Becoming a Blessed, that's it, Blessed Congregation is a great book. And I would say this is the only pushback I would say in terms of learning about how to reach 20 to 40-year-olds is I think we should broaden it to the process of discovering how to do this, because by the time the church figures out how to reach 20-year-olds, they're 40 with kids. I mean, how many trainings have they had about millennials? And millennials are in a different, they're in a different age group now. They have different things that they're looking for. The other piece that I'll share is just talking with our chaplain here at Muskingum University. When he was a chaplain, nobody was coming to the chapel services and that sort of thing, but all the students at the time had told him, what we really want are Bible studies, which surprised him. And then he started doing these small groups. I think they said Bible study. I think they meant small group. And I think there's a subtle difference between the two, because they really were looking for community and connection and learning and being with each other and a place where they could ask questions. But I think that would be my only pushback is I always get nervous focusing just on one generation, because by the time we get it figured out, there's the next one coming up that has a whole other different. So how do we broaden it of what's the process of as a church to figure this stuff out? Is there a means or a process that we can follow to help us understand generational needs and context and that sort of thing? Because yeah, we have a lot of things designed well for millennials that who knows what, even my kids, who knows what they're going to be looking for, or the people that are in preschool right now, who knows what they're going to be looking for. You know, we don't even know what technology is going to exist by the time that happens. I don't even know what it's going to look like. Debbie, I think you're
I
unmuted.
may have,
Yeah.
I may have said this here. I just said it to somebody. It might have been here. The other thing about that 20 to 40-year-old demographic is that most of us, two parts, most of us don't have the building, the programs, the rock wall, the activities that a lot of the big box churches have. We don't have the capability for that. But alongside of that, the one thing that I came to, and somebody in the congregation said it, that we have to stop trying to reach the people that aren't here and take care of the people that are. And, you know, so I have a retiree kind of group of people that slowly but surely is being added to by maybe 50-year-olds or 40-year-olds. So when you're caring for the people that are there and not always trying to find the people that you want to be there. I mean, kids, everybody was always worried, oh, well, if we don't have any kids, well, it's funny. We suddenly have kids coming along with maybe grandma or something else. So I just felt like when I stopped trying to beat myself up to figure out how to get the 20, 30, 40-year-olds to come, the kids, the families, it sort of just naturally is sort of happening because we're caring for the people that are here, and it shows.
Yeah,
so,
you're showing value.
Yeah.
Let's see. Tara, you had your hand up, and then Lance, you had your hand up. So we'll go Tara and then Lance. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Debbie. Yeah, absolutely.
Since we were previously sharing some resources, I just wanted to throw this one out. First, well, Cambridge Presbyterian Church in Cambridge, Ohio, has been doing for years now it's not so much a Bible study as it is a discussion group on Sunday mornings. It's called the Wired Word. Have any of you heard of that?
Yes.
Okay, for those of you who have not, Cambridge Church has had a great success with this. It is an online based topical Bible study of sorts where you get the topic, the leader will get the topic and discussion questions and things like that ahead of time. That gets emailed out to everybody, and then you show up for class or whatever you want to call it, and the leader has some prompting questions to kind of guide the conversation, and it's all based on current events, and it will draw your attention to scripture to discuss and talk about how the current event relates to the Bible scripture and what are we going to do about it and how can we make that a real part of our everyday lives. It's a great, I love it. When I participated in it, I was excited when I found it to bring it to Cambridge Church. My session wants to do it here, but I can't get anybody who's going to lead it. and I'm part-time, so leading things is not necessarily part of my call.
I got you.
Hmm.
So wired word. So I wrote that down. I'm going to try to, condense all this and that sort of thing. I put something in the chat because we're talking about everyone dumping liturgy to go towards non-denominational. Rhythms of Grace, by Mike Cosper is really interesting because he's a non-denominational that rediscovered liturgy. And that's the book I used when I was training some college students to be worship leaders as a part of like an internship. It's just fascinating to see somebody who was like, hey, what's this liturgy? And discovers that there's a whole tradition and faith tradition around it. So it just shows how we have those with liturgy that are looking at ways to become more a little freer. And then here's somebody from a non-denominational that's rediscovering. So it'll help you look at liturgy in a positive way from like a non-denominational perspective. The thing that I heard Deb just share, I just want to emphasize that I think one of the things, and maybe this is where emotional intelligence comes in, or I'm not really sure, but I think when we are driven by anxiety, it doesn't matter what we'll do, we'll make the wrong decision. And I think that's what I heard from Deb. Like if we get too wrapped up with beating ourselves up, then we just come off as being needy. And nothing turns off young people then we really want you here because, so we got to be careful. We got to make sure that we feel good about what we're doing and that we're not doing things from a source of anxiety and fear, but really a firm grounding of what we do. I think attitude is everything sometimes, and that can be tricky because we don't want to come off as desperate, waiting by the phone. Please call me. My sons don't like that. I can I can tell you that. Lance, you had your hand up. I'm sorry. And then Christine, I think you had your hand up. Yep. So go ahead, Lance.
Helps if I unmute. There we go. Okay, so this goes back to pre-pandemic.
Okay.
A minister in Maumee Valley Presbytery, probably at least 10 years ago now, possibly longer, came up with an idea for getting outside of the four walls of the church and meeting the people where they are. And she called it Beer and Hymns. Yeah. And she got a bar, tavern, whatever you want to call it, in Toledo to open on a Sunday night 4 times a year, once a quarter. And we took a little band in and we set up shop. There was no sermon. There was no scripture reading. There was none of the things that we do in church except for hymns. And we used all the moldy oldies, as I call them, because they're in the you don't get penalized for using them.
Yeah.
I don't.
It's not
Public domain.
Public domain. Thank you. Thank you.
I think that's the main reason why we have King James Version people at Hearns, because it's public domain. They don't have to pay anything.
we used all the moldy oldies from the public domain so that we couldn't get in any trouble for using them. And that took off like I've never seen. There were nights that the place was packed to the walls, especially at Christmas time. And it was so loud. The motto around the whole thing, the catchphrase was sing loudly, drink slowly, make friends.
Okay.
And I remember one Christmas time in particular when there were so many people there and not everybody was singing. They were talking and making noise, and it was kind of hard to focus. And we got right down to the end and we sang Silent Night. The place went completely silent and everybody sang in 4-part harmony, and it was the most amazing thing I have experienced. I was like, wow, this is what it's all about. And people didn't want to leave. They were like, we're having fun. Let's keep doing this. and then the pandemic happened and everything
Right.
went down. And now I've been told that beer and hymns still exists. It's just not under the auspices of the presbytery. There's been other denominations that have come in and taken that have put in their spin on
Been
it.
part of
And it's still going. I just haven't been there in a long time. But so that kind of stuff can work. You just have
Lance,
to-
I'm hearing two. I just want to summarize two things because I'm hearing two things. And just to let you guys know, I'm writing down everything that you're saying, but I'm also like making little broader things of, I wonder what this could look like. So one, whatever we would call it, but getting the church outside of the church, however you want to say it, like ways to think about being being the body of Christ in the community outside of the building. So I've heard that one, and I bet you there's some neat things there. But I also wrote, because what you're doing with the hymns, these moldy oldies, as you call them, you're recontextualizing them, right? And so just as a side note, my parents are way cooler than me. I was the weirdo 17-year-old who loved liturgy. That's how I got into church. And my parents and my sisters, no. Dad, he says, I like your preaching, but if we came out here, we'll probably go to a different church. Thanks, Dad. But my dad's a worship leader, and they're much more hip on modern contemporary music than I ever will be. Here's the funny part. My dad will say, hey, have you heard of this band? And the answer is always no. He's like, they have this great song called Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. Do you know it? I'm like, yeah, it's a great hymn. Right. And he's like, oh, it's a hymn? Yeah, it's a hymn. But a lot of contemporary artists are taking these moldy oldies, as we call them, recontextualizing them. Same content, same beautiful message, but I don't like to use marketing words like repackaging, but and Judith Fender, who couldn't be with us today, she was asking about training in contextualizing Bible stories. Like, how do we recontextualize parables and stories in a modern context so people kind of get all the little details that are going on? So maybe there's a whole thing on just recontextualization of, we know that we're supposed to sing to one another. We know we're supposed to pray to one another. We have an idea of how it's supposed to look, but maybe there's different ways that we can do the core, what we've been called to do, but in a different context in a different way. So those are kind of the two things I heard. Plus, I would love to sing hymns and drink beer. That sounds lovely. I might have to steal that, Lance. I don't know, because there's a brewery 3 miles down the road from the church. So, Christine, I think you've had your hand up. You've been very patient. Thank you.
Well, I was just talking to one of my colleagues, CREs, yesterday, and she was talking about, it kind of brought it up, and this is sort of piggybacking on something you were saying, but she was talking about the fact that she said, I'm in the church where they want the church to grow, but they've hired 2 introverted CREs to lead them into the future. Because it's what's available. It's what they can afford. I mean, all the reasons for small churches.
Yeah.
But I think part of our challenge is, well, we want to do that. We've all taken this oath to keep our energy and our imagination and the 4 hearts harmony of this oath of leadership that we take. And I think at some point maybe there needs to be some kind of focus on helping each other as colleagues to be able to keep that energy up, because you get very tired of, I tried this, I tried that, I try that, I try that. And I think that apathy comes through to our people. No matter how much, how do you make that where you step in the pulpit every Sunday, or every time you're there leading a Bible study, having some kind of a new sort of energy that you can feed people who are getting tired especially in our older churches and congregations. I knew when I was at Fredericktown before I retired, we were doing oh, we've got to get kids, we've got to get kids, we've got to get kids. And finally I said, we live in an older community. What can we do for our older people? They also don't go to church. So let's focus on that. And that's exactly what they did. They got a grant to the presbytery and they found a impending need, and they have a little thing called the Friday Cafe, and people come out in droves to have soup and conversation at lunchtime, just because we were in a place where the older people were losing their meeting spot, and we had extra space, that we repurposed, and it's done great. And they've actually made enough just having donations that 2 years they have helped pay off the huge mortgage that the church has from a building project years ago. So it's been a great success, but we still don't have kids. But we don't have a huge growth in the church, and I'm a member there because of keeping our membership. But I can say that, I mean, I'll be turning 70 tomorrow. And
happy birthday.
Thank you. And it's kind of like, most of our CREs are bivocational, retired, whatever. And gosh, the energy just kind of gets drained easy. That full bucket gets a little empty sometimes. So just
Christine, yeah, one of the things I heard, I just wrote down peer care. I didn't know what else to call it, right?
that's fine. Yeah.
Because there's a lot, because we know that we should have mentoring and support, and sometimes we look to the presbytery to do that. But is there a way to learn how to be good care partners for each other? I believe that's part of one of our vows, if I remember correctly from the Book of Order, to care for our colleagues. But how do you do that in a way because you don't want to turn into a complaining session, right? Like you don't want to like burn each other out to the point where you're venting to the point where nothing happens. But how can we be good care partners for one another? That could be an interesting piece, right? Like how can we care for each other and support each other as colleagues? What does that look like?
Yeah, and interestingly, the same person yesterday in my lunch conversation with her was, the Book of Order requires that we have a mentor, of course, somebody who's supposed to be helping us. And she said, if I wanted to have an ordained person, I'd have to go all the way back to Chicago, where I went to school. And I have just made a proposal to our local CRE group that in reading the Book of Order, we maybe place some people on the meeting that we're having that are ordained folks who are willing to be mentors presbytery wide, so that everybody has somebody to, and that was pretty well received. But
yeah, that's one of the things that I've been tasked to look at, Christine. Also, I've been asked to, just as a side note, I've been asked to write an overture, bring it to my church and then bring it up to presbytery. Mostly because some of you know I'm in seminary currently. I'm actually an inquirer, soon to be candidate. Don't ask me why. That's a whole other conversation. But I am enjoying the classes. But one of the things that I did take my polity class, and that was my final project, was writing an overture around the supervision mentoring piece. So who knows? But it doesn't help us in the short term. Realistically, we're talking 3 or 4 years before anything happens with it. But I know we're quickly running out of time. What's interesting is the big theme, and I'll probably summarize some of what we talked about, and I did record this. Everything seems to be focused on from the inside out, right? Like community engagement, volunteers, recontextualizing, connecting with different generations of people, caring for one another. Like, it seems like most of the themes that came up are outside of the body or engaging the body outside. That seems to be the main theme. I do wonder, and we only have a handful of minutes, do people feel like there are internal trainings that they think are important, or do you feel like you get enough of those and you really need the outward focused ones? Internal, in my opinion, would be something like I'm a big fan of small group communication. That's what I used to teach, and I think small group communication, for example, is one of those. Like, think about most of what we do in ministry happens in meetings and teams, and we have no actual training on how to do that well. You're just expected to run a meeting. You're just expected to facilitate. But that would be what I call like an internal training, like how to do the internal parts better. But the main theme I'm hearing from all of you is more, how do we get out there? How do we engage with the community? How do we be relevant? How do we connect? And that's what I'm hearing. And I'm not saying that mine is better. I'm just saying that as an example. It's just, that seemed to be the main theme that I'm hearing today, is a real desire to seek out training and conversations about engaging outside of the building and outside of the group. Is that a fair assessment of like kind of like the general topics that we're hearing? Like, I think that's
other
big.
than other than what I was just saying about having that colleagueship, I think that's a fair assumption of
Okay.
what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, just or a summary of kind of where we landed this time around. And that's good to know. Like, these are the kind of things that and I personally like to bring people who do ministry, but I also like to bring in people that talk about these things that are outside of the church world. I think sometimes you get some fun perspective that way as well. I still remember a Presbyterian meeting where we brought in a sand company, of all people. And everyone's like, why did we bring in a sand company? Right. But they had a major goal, and they talked through the process, and a lot of the process that to get to their goal, they were trying to be zero carbon footprint as a company. And they had a lot of cultural norms that they had to break down, and they had to change the culture and the values of the whole organization. So that's why they were there. How do you change mindset within an organization? They were talking about it from a company that produces sand. But it was good to get us out of our church world and to think more broadly. Oh, right, we are an organization, and how do other organizations do this, and are there lessons that we can learn within a church context? Go ahead, Bonnie.
I'm right here. Are you there?
No, I thought you had you had your hand up.
I just have one. I know we're out of time. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. When we're talking about the future of ministry with this group, for me, the future of ministry is about 3 years. You know, between now and the next 3-4 years, I'm not far advanced in age. So I like the idea of having workshop, that shortened version. And I would like to have a first one in how to change direction in conversations with people from the downer part that you're talking about, Tim, to the hopeful part that our future can be.
Okay.
Working with the people I know in the congregation who are the seniors, how can I be an agent of change to optimism when they seem to have that cloud of pessimism, and we can label it from COVID or whatever we want. But for me, the future is now, within the next, 2, 3, 5 years. So that's what I hope that this group can kind of hone in on. And maybe I need some psychology lesson about how to change my attitude and bring that to somebody else. That's all. That's all. Thank you.
Well, Bonnie, you said a phrase, how can I be an agent of change? I mean, that just sounds like I think you just named what our next brown bag will be. Like, how do you be an agent of change? Because we're talking about training and workshops, and boy, I don't know about you, but I've been to some workshops where you get really excited. You can't wait to bring this back to the church. You can't wait. And then you're like, okay, how do I go from where I'm excited to actual change within the congregation, and what does that look like? I don't think it's necessarily rocket science, but I think there's probably some people that know how to do that. I know my wife, who's she leads our mission team, she stumbled upon something from World Vision, which is a 5-part prayer of how do you pray change? How do you pray for change as a part of that? And she wants me to you know, clean it up and have the congregation begin looking at it and praying it. But I think that's interesting. Yeah, how do we become agents of change? Because it's one thing to get all this training and you know, but how do you make that translation?
And I do agree with Wayne earlier about it does take somebody who knows what they're talking about to tell us, to show us. And I like
yeah, and then how do we translate that in turn? I think somebody said because we have that unique training in the PCUSA for transitional ministry, right? So you can be an interim pastor, and we have programs for that. I had a pastor, recently retired pastor, tell me, if we're all honest, we're all in transitional ministry. Whether you call it that or not, that's where we are. I want to thank everyone. I did record this. I'll share it. It'll probably go out tomorrow after our staff meeting at staff. And I wrote down, and I'll do a debrief, and we'll start looking around to see if somebody can be willing to do some kind of training around some of the things that we're talking about, because I'm willing to bet there's people out there. And if you know of somebody, like somebody had mentioned Graham Standish or some others that might be interested in actually doing something that's synod wide, that would be awesome to do. And then yeah, I think that could be a good discussion for next month. How to be an agent of change. You know, what does that look like? What does it look like for us internally? Right. And what does it look like of sharing that and getting other people engaged? And I'd love to hear, because boy, it as you said, sometimes it's hard for us to get out of the, oh, if only, if only, if only. I know just looking at this screen that there's some success stories in there. You know, however you want to define it, there's some where people were agents of change. And we'd love to hear that, because it's nice to hear about examples and stories, and so that we can get motivated as well. Well, thank you, everyone. I want to say blessings to everyone. And once I get to, so I have to give this to Chip, and then Chip uploads it to YouTube, and then I send it all back out to you. So thank you all for coming out. And Tara, I almost wore my shirt today. The imagination, serving with imagination and love and prayer. We have T-shirts. I'll have to show you guys.
Mine
next
is
week,
dirty.
So. Oh, okay. It has the PCUSA logo kind of here. It's a T-shirt, like navy blue, and then on the back it says "Serving with Imagination and Love." You know, it's our ordination bell on the back. So, where can we get one? Uh-oh, Tara.
Is it the one that Sarah created, or?
So
I don't know.
I had actually purchased a sweatshirt with just the saying on the front. And then a while ago, back in August, our parish was doing a group all parish outdoor worship, and the people that I was working with wanted to do matching t-shirts. And so I had a friend who has one of those Cricut t-shirt maker things just create it for us. I got the PCUSA logo from the PCUSA website, and then had her print the things on the back. You can really, there's no copyright on it. Just be respectful.
I don't know, Tara. Just called you out. You might have a whole other side gig happening. Because I know Josh wants one. Now. Josh already says he wants one. Yeah, maybe I'll try to remember to wear mine next time, so y'all can see it. Maybe you know, maybe I can get Cinda to pre-make a few, and we can have them. Well, thank you, everyone. You guys all have a great day, and be blessed this week.